Hi everyone, welcome to my November books and mitered granny square project that I have done in 2024. I'm a little behind on these videos, so here we go with all of my November reads along with all of the mitered granny squares that I made throughout November. The first book that I read in November is called The End of Her by Shari Lapena. This is your standard mystery thriller. There's some twists and turns that kept me fairly engaged, but as I listened to this one, I did find my mind wandering quite a bit. This sometimes happens when I listen to a book rather than actually read it on my Kindle or on the physical version of the book. It did not capture my attention as much as maybe it would have if I had read it on the page. This was an okay book. I expected to enjoy it more, but it just didn't keep me engaged. The characters aren't developed and the storylines get muddled. So Goodreads rates this as 4 stars, but I'm only giving it a 3. The next book that I read in November is called No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall. This is another mystery thriller that just fell short for me. There's 3 sisters who reconnect at their childhood home where, shockingly, their parents were murdered when they were teens. As we get into the story, the history of that entire incident and period of time unfolds, along with some twists and turns, of course. I also listened to this one instead of reading it on a Kindle or a physical book, and I just wasn't into the characters, and the writing was just all right. It didn't quite hold my attention. I only gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. The third book that I read in November is called All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers. This, again, is another sort of murder mystery thriller type genre book, and I should have taken my own advice because after the last 2 books, I told myself, you need to find a new genre. Maybe you've overdone it with the murder mystery thriller genre for a little bit, but I didn't take my own advice because this too is a thriller. However, I actually enjoyed this one. It's a story about a little girl who goes missing as a young child. Her friend, who is now much older, comes back to the area where they grew up to take care of her uncle who has become ill. During her time back, she looks into the mystery surrounding her missing friend. I also listened to this one and I thought it was well written, well produced, and overall very engaging. There's, of course, some twists and turns, and I think the writing in general kind of kept this one flowing for me, and even in the spots where the plot or the storyline sort of fell apart a little bit, the writing and the character development held it together. So Goodreads gave this one a 4 out of 5, and I agree. 4 out of 5 from me too. Next up, I read Calling Me Home by Julie Kibler. I actually read this on my Kindle, and I really, really enjoyed the writing, the storyline, the characters, really everything about it. This is a story about unlikely friends who go on a sort of a road trip back to the hometown of one of them, and they each kind of get to know each other a little bit better. We learn an entire story about the older friend. One is much older, and about her life, where she grew up, how things were. But the writing was very well done. The characters were believable, and you really actually felt sort of their joy or their pain or whatever emotions that they were feeling at the time. On Goodreads, this is rated at 4.25 stars, and I agree. I gave it a 4 star, but if I could, I would have given it a 4.5. Next up, I read The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth, and I'm really glad I decided to pick this one up. I actually listened to this and thought the production and writing were both very well done. In this book, yet another thriller, of course, the main character is a very shy woman who works at a library. She has some sensory issues, maybe some sort of autistic issues as well, which causes her to be secluded and seen as different, although she is functioning and can live alone and hold a job. She has a sister who is quite the opposite of her, and she comes across the sister as helpful and always having, her needy sister's best interest at heart. but does she really? There are some twists and turns along the way in this one which kept me intrigued. I enjoyed the different characters and the contrast between the sisters. Goodreads has this at 4.15 stars, and I do agree. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. Yet another thriller, and yet another set of friends. These friends are grown up when the story starts, but we know that there is some sort of childhood mystery that they were involved in as they were growing up. One of the friends comes back to her hometown, sees all of these people that she grew up with. It must have been a very small town. Everybody seems to know each other, and this mystery kind of resurfaces, and they're all kind of dragged back into what happened when they were younger. I listened to this book and it was just all right for me. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't my favorite either. The characters and the descriptions were good, but in some instances I found myself not really enjoying or caring much about any of them. There are some good twists and turns though, and it was a fairly quick read, or in my case, a fairly quick listen. Goodreads gave this a 3.95 stars, and I'm about there. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. This is my first book by this author. I sort of knew what to expect. Another murder mystery thriller type book, and this one didn't disappoint on that front. The writing is good and the story and plot were good. This one starts out as a couple on an excursion bus with other travelers in the middle of winter, and you probably guessed, in the middle of nowhere. This plays out sort of like a modern version of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, where all the travelers find themselves stuck in a cabin. It's bad winter weather. They can't get out, and suddenly, slowly and methodically, each of them start to die. So now all of the ones that are left are becoming suspicious and afraid of each other. I listened to this and it was enjoyable enough for me to want to read more or listen to more by Darcy Coates. Goodreads has this at 3.84 stars, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. And finally, the last book that I read in November, and one of the best books that I read all year, The Women by Kristin Hannah. This is a historical fiction novel focused around the Vietnam War. It tells a story of women on the front lines of the war working as nurses. I did read this one on my Kindle. For me, this one began a bit slow, but once I committed to really reading it, I couldn't put it down. The writing is realistic, descriptive. You feel a part of the story. You feel a part of the characters. If you enjoy historical fiction at all, I highly recommend this book. I learned so much about that time period. It just really pulls you back to that time, and after, when soldiers and even these nurses came home, how their lives were affected just by being a part of the Vietnam War. It was just a really good read, and I highly recommend it. Goodreads gave this one a 4.62, and I am definitely giving it a 5 out of 5 stars. So those are my November reads. I got through 8 books, mostly audible kind of books, listening to books that way. I hadn't been able to read much in the last few months, so this was a nice month to kind of catch up on my reading, get ready for the holidays. And now we only have December, and that video will be coming up really soon. I read a lot in December as well, so I have a good stack of mitered granny squares, and I will show you those once we get through December. So until next time, happy granny mitered square crocheting, and happy reading, everyone. Bye.